Hi students, this video is to give a little extra help to the people who are writing their explication on oranges. I was thinking over the last couple of days of what parts of oranges students sometimes struggle with when they're writing an explication. So I decided to make this little video um, to give you some tips. Um, so the main thing I want to sort of help you to think about is in a poetry explication, you really want to think about how each part of the poem is different. So, for example, some people learn how to fix cars by taking apart the whole engine and then putting the engine back together because that makes them figure out how each part fits into the whole. And that's kind of a good metaphor for what we're doing when we do a poetry explication. It's the same kind of analysis. We're thinking about all the different pieces and how they all work together to create a certain effect. Um, and one of the things that sometimes people, one mistake sometimes people make when they're writing about oranges is they sort of say, oh, it's a sweet poem about a date, which is true. It's true, but it's a little general. And I think one of the things that will help you if you're writing a poetry explication about it is to think about how each part is different. And I would sort of recommend, because in this poem, there's a change in mood, which some of you referred to in the discussion of it. And it's really important in your poetry explication to kind of get the before the change in mood, what causes the change in mood, and the after of the change. So this poem has a very definite beginning, middle, and end, and each part is really different. So I would recommend to you, when you're writing about this poem, you break it down to the part before the drugstore. And a lot of you noticed before the drugstore, the speaker is feeling cold. He says the oranges weigh him down. So when something weighs you down, they're like a burden, right? So at the beginning of the poem, the oranges are a burden, maybe, to the speaker. And one thing we know about Gary Soto is his parents were migrant farm workers. So maybe they picked oranges and maybe he felt a little self-conscious about that. I'm just a poor boy and all I have is these oranges that my parents pick. So at the beginning of the poem, the oranges are kind of a burden. At the beginning of the poem, it's cold. The cold is kind of harsh, the same way it is in those winter Sundays, frost cracking beneath my steps. And he's with the girl, but he just touches her shoulder. He doesn't seem that confident yet, right? Um, and then, so you could write a supporting section just about that beginning. What's the mood like? A lot of you said he seems nervous. He just lightly touches the girl. He's feeling burdened by these oranges. So that's the beginning. Then the middle of the poem, you might write a separate section about is the drugstore. And in the drugstore, something really important happens that probably is the thing that changes the mood. He goes into this drugstore. The girl wants a chocolate that costs a dime. He doesn't have it. As many of you noticed, there's some sort of a suggestion. She's a little richer, so she doesn't even think that he might not have it. But then he does something kind of amazing. He has this nickel, but he realizes he also has this orange, right? And he takes this huge risk. He takes, and I always think at this point, whenever you go on a date, isn't your worry that you don't have enough of whatever? I'm not smart enough. I'm not attractive enough. I'm not whatever enough. And he's probably like, all I've got are these oranges. But he takes what he's got and he does something kind of risky and creative with it. He puts the orange up with the nickel. And fortunately, the woman behind the counter is super cool. She understands the situation. He says, I live, um, I put them on the counter. When I looked up, the lady's eyes met mine and held them, knowing very well what it was all about. She was kind. She took the orange and the nickel. She gave him the chocolate. We know that because we see the girl with the chocolate at the end. Um, so it's a little bit of a miracle, that moment. Um, it's a moment when he discovers what he can do with what he's got, that he has choices, that he can be creative, he can take risks, he can try things, and he succeeds. It's kind of a huge moment. And interestingly, it's after that moment that we get the stanza break. All that, it's like the world changes, right? All that cold and fear of the opening, and then he takes this risk and it works. And then he sets off this next section as its own stanza, like something big has changed. And in this second stanza, the world is different. Fog hangs like old coats between the trees. That's almost a cozy image, right? And then he says, I took, and he calls her my girl now. Before, I think he just called her, what did he call her before? Let's look. Her house, he just refers to her as she. But at the end, after that moment, when he gets her the chocolate, he says, she's my girl. He feels like a sense of accomplishment, right? And he holds her hand for 2 blocks. Do you remember what a big deal that was when you were 12 to hold somebody's hand for 2 blocks, or like put my arm around her in the movie for, a whole 20 minutes, right? It's a big deal. Very different from just that moment of touching her shoulder in the beginning. There's a progression here. He suddenly is holding her hand for 2 blocks. And then he released it to let her unwrap the chocolate. And remember, those oranges that were such a burden at the beginning, he's kind of discovered what those oranges can do, or what he can do with those oranges, what all of us can do with what we've got, which we're worried may not be enough, right? So now the orange that he has left over is kind of transformed. It's not a burden anymore. He peels the orange, and it's all of a sudden, it's this bright, beautiful, powerful thing, so bright against the gray of December that from some distance, someone might have thought I was making a fire in my hands. So now the orange is, powerful, magical. Fire in my hands is like something a superhero would do to create fire in their hands. And he was a little bit of a superhero, wasn't he, in the drugstore? He didn't have enough money, and he kind of did a magic trick, right? He sort of turned his orange into a nickel. That woman accepted it. So these are just some ideas to nudge you a little bit further in this poem. I really encourage you, when you write your explication, to think of the beginning, middle, and end of the poem, and how each of those sections contributes something different. What effect is created in the beginning? What effect is created in the drugstore? What effect is created after the drugstore? How does the mood change, and why might it have changed? I hope that helps you a little. Just use details and examples from each section to support your points that the effect in those different sections is different. And let me know if you have any questions.